It was one of those nights when the summer air felt heavy and sticky, the kind of night when even a buzz from cheap beer makes you bold enough to do stupid things, and that was exactly what I did when I decided to take the shortcut down the hill back to campus instead of the long well-lit route. I was drunk, half stumbling, half convincing myself that I wasn't, when I suddenly noticed a figure standing under the flickering streetlight in the distance. A woman. A beautiful one, dressed in pure white, her skin so pale that under the dim light she seemed to glow faintly, like she didn't belong to this world. My brain, which was soaked in alcohol and horror novels I had binge-read last week, immediately jumped to the worst possible conclusion: ghost. I slowed down, squinting through the dark, trying to see her face clearly, but from my angle, all I could make out was her delicate side profile, her eyes looking a little red, her lips pressed together like she was waiting for someone. My heart was already racing, but since alcohol makes idiots braver than they should be, I walked closer and asked, "What are you doing out here this late?" The moment the words left my mouth, I regretted them. What kind of dumb question was that? What could anyone possibly be doing standing there in the dark, alone, at midnight? Her head turned toward me slowly, her eyes narrowing like she was studying me, and for a second I swore I felt a chill race down my spine. Then she spoke, her voice soft but carrying in the night air, "I'm waiting for my family to send me money." My drunken brain short-circuited at that, and all I could think of was how in ghost stories, spirits always say creepy stuff like they're waiting, they're hungry, or they're lost. A bead of sweat rolled down my temple as my imagination filled in the blanks. What if she wasn't alive? What if she was one of those wandering souls that latch on to drunk idiots like me? I could practically see the headlines: local college student collapses after meeting a ghost in white. My gut screamed at me to run, but my legs felt like lead, stuck in place as she took a step closer, squinting at me like she was trying to recognize my face. "Ethan Miller," she said my name out loud, her tone carrying a hint of surprise, and I swear my blood ran cold right then. How the hell did she know who I was? My mind instantly recalled every rule I had ever read in supernatural forums: don't answer when a ghost calls your name, don't look back if they follow, and never, ever engage. And here I was, standing face to face with one, having already asked questions like an idiot. I forced a stiff smile, hoping it would pass as polite, but inside I was panicking so badly that I could barely keep my breathing steady. She tilted her head, eyes softening strangely as if she suddenly felt shy, and then she asked, "Are you alone?" That was it for me. My chest tightened, my brain screamed abort mission, and I blurted out something incoherent before my knees gave out and I literally fell right there in front of her. She looked startled, even stepped forward like she wanted to help me, reaching out her hand with genuine concern, but that just made it worse. The wind howled at that exact moment, rattling the old streetlight until it flickered violently, and my terror peaked. Without thinking, I screamed like a maniac, slapped her hand away, and scrambled back up with adrenaline I didn't know I had. My body finally decided to work, and I bolted down the street like I was being chased by death itself, her voice faint behind me calling my name, warning me that it wasn't safe to be out alone at night. But of course, I didn't dare look back. Every horror story says the same thing: never turn around when a ghost calls you. I sprinted like I was in the Olympics, lungs burning, ears ringing, and when I finally made it back to the dorm, I slammed the door shut and collapsed onto the floor, drenched in sweat, swearing to myself I would never, ever take that shortcut again. The next morning, with a fever creeping up and my nerves still fried, I tried to laugh it off by ordering a whole arsenal online sage, bagua mirrors, even a wooden cross, anything to exorcise whatever bad luck I had just invited. My roommate Nathan Reed walked in, saw my shopping cart full of ghost-busting items, and gave me the weirdest look. "Bro, what's this, some fusion of Chinese superstition and Western magic? Are you fighting demons now?" he teased. I waved him off weakly, muttering something about bad vibes, but then he said something that made me freeze. "Hey, did you hear? The campus goddess, Emily Carter, apparently got mistaken for a ghost last night. Her roommate even posted on Instagram making fun of her. They said she came back to the dorm super serious and even colder than usual. My mind blanked. Goddess? Emily Carter. That name wasn't unfamiliar. She was a graduate student, 1 year above me, the kind of girl everyone admired from afar but rarely got close to. I had heard about her countless times, about how beautiful and aloof she was, but I had never actually seen her in person until last night. My pulse quickened as I grabbed Nathan's phone from his hand and scrolled to the Instagram story. There she was, blurry in the photo but still stunning enough to make anyone stop in their tracks. My stomach dropped to the floor. The time. The place. The white dress. The face. There was no mistaking it. The ghost I had been terrified of last night wasn't some spirit from a horror novel, it was Emily Carter, the goddess of our campus. And not only had I mistaken her for a ghost, I had screamed at her, slapped her hand away, and then ran like my life depended on it. My entire body heated up with embarrassment, fever or not. I wanted to bury myself alive right then and there. Nathan was still laughing, clapping me on the shoulder. Man, whoever that poor guy was must have been drunk out of his mind. Imagine calling Emily a ghost. What a clown. My head spun as I realized that clown was me. I pulled at my hair in frustration, groaning loudly, while Nathan gave me a suspicious look. Why do you look like the world just ended? And why'd you buy a peachwood sword? Dude, what the hell did you do? I immediately cancelled my order in shame, mumbling excuses, but deep down I knew I had committed the ultimate social suicide. Of all the people in the world, I had to mistake Emily Carter for a ghost. And worse, she probably knew my name now. I could only pray she'd forget everything. But knowing my luck, this wasn't over. Not even close. I thought I could just bury the memory of that humiliating night deep inside me, let it rot there forever like an old scar no one talks about, but life apparently has a sick sense of humor because the very next day I found myself walking into the lecture hall for the academic exchange meeting, still burning up with fever, only to freeze at the doorway when I saw her Emily Carter, the so-called campus goddess, the exact same ghost I had screamed at like a lunatic 12 hours earlier, standing calmly on the podium with a microphone in hand, speaking in that clear and steady voice of hers that somehow carried authority and elegance at the same time, and when her eyes briefly flicked in my direction, my stomach dropped so hard I almost turned and ran right back out. She paused for half a second, like she had just seen something unexpected, then continued her presentation as if nothing happened, but my paranoid brain was already screaming, she remembers, she definitely remembers, and she's going to destroy me. I lowered my head, muttering to myself, can't see me, as if closing my eyes would turn me invisible, then slid into an empty seat beside my roommate Nathan, who was completely oblivious to my inner collapse. He leaned over with his dumb grin and whispered, "Why are you acting like you've seen a ghost?" If only he knew. Out of the corner of my eye, I stole a glance at Emily on the stage. The sunlight cut through the blinds, catching the frame of her glasses, and the halo it made around her was so dazzling that for a second I forgot all about the terror. Damn it, no wonder she was called the goddess of our campus. But right then, her gaze swept across the audience again and stopped on me. My breath caught. It wasn't a casual glance, her eyes narrowed slightly, that same way she had looked at me last night under the streetlight, like she was trying to piece together a puzzle. I snapped my head down so fast my neck cracked, heart pounding like a drum. This was it. She was on to me. And as fate would have it, when it came time for my class to present, I had no choice but to walk right past her. I took a deep breath, rehearsed my lines in my head, and dragged myself up onto the podium, forcing myself to focus on the slides instead of the goddess who might be plotting my social funeral. Miraculously, I managed to get through my speech without stuttering, my fever momentarily forgotten as I buried myself in the topic. At the end, I made the mistake of glancing at the audience, and my eyes landed on Emily. She wasn't just looking, she was staring directly at me, her expression unreadable, her lips slightly pressed together as though holding back something. My concentration shattered instantly. The room tilted, my head went dizzy, and I realized the fever was clawing back with vengeance. When it finally ended, I stumbled off the podium, praying I could just disappear into the crowd, but Nathan had other plans. "Dude, why are you so tense today? You're acting like she's gonna eat you alive," he chuckled, stuffing his bag. I wanted to tell him she already had, last night, in my nightmares. As the lecture ended and people started leaving, I noticed Emily standing from her seat. Relief washed over me. Finally, she was leaving, sparing me further humiliation. But then, instead of walking out, she stopped halfway, lips pursed like she was hesitating. A group of female classmates swarmed me with questions about my presentation, which was the only reason I didn't bolt. From the corner of my vision, I saw Emily sit back down, watching, waiting. My pulse spiked. Great, so she wasn't done with me yet. By the time I finished answering everyone, the classroom was nearly empty except for Nathan snoozing in the back and Emily sitting there with that same unreadable calm. My instincts told me to run, but before I could wake Nathan and escape, Emily walked toward me, her steps deliberate, her eyes steady. My legs turned to stone. She stopped in front of me, hesitating for a moment like she was struggling with words, then finally spoke in that low, composed voice, "Wait a minute. Did you recognize me?" My heart almost stopped. I scrambled to look calm, though I probably looked more like a deer caught in headlights. She stared at me for a beat longer, then pulled a set of keys from her pocket and held them out stiffly. "You dropped these last night." My jaw almost unhinged. No wonder I couldn't find my house keys this morning. They had fallen when I tripped in front of her. And she had kept them, even brought them here. I wanted to melt into the floor. What kind of goddess collects evidence of your most embarrassing night and hands it back to you the next day? I took the keys with trembling hands, mumbling thanks, but before I could retreat, Nathan's groggy voice cut through the silence. He had woken up just in time to witness me taking something from Emily's hand, and in his half-asleep brain, it looked way too intimate. "Bro, if you two need privacy, I'll just go back to sleep," he mumbled with a stupid grin. I nearly choked. Emily's hand froze mid-air, her expression flickering between confusion and something else, and I jumped back like I had been electrocuted, waving my arms defensively. Nathan snickered and left, muttering encouragement like some cheap wingman, leaving me alone with her. The air grew thick with awkwardness. She was silent for a long time, eyes drifting to the floor, then suddenly she said softly, "I'm sorry." My brain lagged. "Sorry? For what?" She turned her head away, her tone almost annoyed with herself. "Last night I used the wrong words. I scared you." My jaw dropped. Here I was, the idiot who mistook her for a ghost, screamed, slapped her hand away, and ran like a coward, and she was apologizing to me. I felt like I should crawl into a trash can. I waved my hands furiously, stammering apologies of my own, telling her I was the one at fault. She just stood there, her eyes locked on me, serious and unwavering, making my throat go dry. Finally, I blurted out something sincere, "I'm really sorry, Emily. I hope you're not unhappy because of me." For a second, she looked stunned, then slowly shook her head, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'm not unhappy. On the contrary," but before she could finish, my nose tickled and I sneezed violently, ruining the moment. Flustered, I fumbled for tissues in my bag, but couldn't find any. Without a word, she silently pulled a tissue from her notebook and handed it to me. My fever made my ears burn. What kind of goddess hands tissues to the ghost-hunting idiot who slapped her last night? I tried to step back, explaining awkwardly that I didn't want to infect her, but she just tilted her head slightly and said, "It's okay. I like catching colds." I froze. What kind of answer was that? Was this girl serious, or was she trolling me? My brain tried to process, but before I could react, she frowned faintly, annoyed by my shocked look. I smiled weakly, chalking it up to her being eccentric. Graduate students, I told myself, they're always weird. When she saw me smile, the corners of her lips lifted too, almost instinctively, but then she quickly stopped, as if catching herself. I didn't have time to think much about it. My phone buzzed, reminding me I had dinner plans, and I excused myself clumsily, wishing the ground would swallow me whole. As I headed for the door, Emily's voice called after me, hesitant but clear, "Senior, can you add me on iMessage?" I froze mid-step, turned around, and there she was, standing with her phone in her hand, her face calm but her fingers trembling slightly. My mind blanked. Of all the people, the campus goddess wanted my contact. I forced myself to think rationally. Maybe she wanted to ask about academics, maybe she needed advice in my field. So I asked, trying to be understanding, "Are you interested in my direction?" Her eyes widened, and she blurted out without thinking, "No, I'm interested in you." Your direction. My brain short-circuited. What the hell was that supposed to mean? Before I could respond, she leaned closer to scan my QR code, her hands shaking so badly she couldn't get it to work, her ears burning red. I couldn't help it. I laughed. "Junior, maybe it's time you changed your phone." Flustered, she opened her code for me instead, but somehow she pulled up her payment code by mistake. I stared, dumbfounded, while she looked mortified. "Sorry," she whispered, her cheeks glowing red. I held back laughter, then couldn't resist teasing, "So how much compensation do you want for the mental damage I caused you last night?" Her entire face turned crimson, and she almost dropped her phone. Somehow, we finally managed to add each other. As I waved goodbye and headed out, she hesitated again, her voice softer this time. "Then if I miss you and want to ask something, can I message you?" My steps faltered. I glanced back at her, standing there in the golden light of the setting sun, eyes on me like she was waiting for my answer. I nodded slowly. Of course. And for the first time since last night, I realized I wasn't afraid anymore. Maybe this ghost was going to haunt me for real, but in a way I wasn't sure I wanted to escape. The night after the seminar I thought maybe things would calm down, that I could just lie low, recover from my embarrassment, and let Emily forget about the fact that I basically screamed in her face and ran away like a madman, but life clearly had different plans because my fever spiked that very evening, leaving me sprawled on my dorm bed like a corpse while Nathan Reed, my roommate, laughed himself silly at my misery, reminding me that I was the guy who once drunk-dialed his own sister and now the same idiot who mistook the campus goddess for a ghost. I pulled the blanket tighter around myself, trying to block out both the fever chills and Nathan's teasing, muttering curses at myself for drinking that night in the first place. By morning, my head was pounding so hard I thought I was going to explode, and when I dragged myself to the pharmacy to get medicine, thinking at least I'd handle it like a responsible adult, fate smacked me again because who did I see at the counter, holding a ridiculous pile of cold medicine, but Emily Carter herself. For a second, I thought my fever was making me hallucinate. She wore a mask, oversized sunglasses, and a sun jacket like she was in disguise, but I'd recognize her in a heartbeat now, the same girl who had been haunting me non-stop. My throat was dry, my voice hoarse when I forced out, "Hey, are you here to buy cold medicine too?" She turned, glanced at me, and for a moment her cool expression wavered. "Senior Ethan Miller," she said quietly, like she had practiced it, and my ears immediately rang with alarm bells. Great, she did remember everything. I laughed nervously, trying to play it off, blaming myself for infecting her with my stupid fever, apologizing under my breath, but she just stared at me, her eyes widening in disbelief. She didn't answer right away, then muttered something about prevention and quickly asked the clerk to pack up the medicine. Before I could even react, she suddenly turned and shoved half the bags into my arms, her ears visibly red above the mask. "Take these." "I don't need them," she said, voice low but firm. I stood there dumbfounded while she practically bolted out of the pharmacy, only to come back 2 seconds later just to awkwardly say goodbye before running away again, leaving me and the cashier looking at each other like we just witnessed a rom-com scene gone wrong. I walked back to the dorm with my brain short-circuiting, clutching a pile of medicine I hadn't paid for, and all I could think was, why does she care if I'm sick? That night, while I was curled up half delirious on my couch at my small off-campus apartment, the doorbell rang. I grumbled, thinking it was Ryan Brooks, my other roommate who lived across town, maybe dropping something off, but when I opened the door, my fever-ridden brain completely froze because standing there, slightly breathless, with sweat beading on her forehead and arms full of groceries and medicine, was Emily Carter. My mind blanked so hard I almost slammed the door again thinking she was the ghost version of herself coming to finish me off, but she just looked at me calmly, though her eyes betrayed some nervousness, and asked softly, "Are you happy I came?" My heart tripped over itself, and for a moment, I couldn't speak, only nodding like an idiot before managing to croak out, "Thanks for coming." She walked past me, setting down the bags neatly on my table like she owned the place, while I stood there still processing how the campus goddess had apparently decided to make a house call for me of all people. When I asked how she even knew where I lived, she muttered that she was my neighbor and her ears immediately turned red again. Of course, I had never noticed because why would I, someone like me living next door to someone like her? My brain was already fried, but then it got worse when my phone buzzed with a call from Ryan. "Yo, heard from Nathan you've got a fever. I'll bring you some medicine later," he said, and I almost collapsed because that stupid text I had meant to send Ryan "I have a fever" had actually gone to Emily the day before. No wonder she was acting so weird. No wonder she showed up here. She thought I had been messaging her. I wanted to die on the spot, but before I could explain, my body gave out completely. Low blood sugar, fever, dehydration, whatever it was, I collapsed, clutching at Emily instinctively. She stiffened when I fell against her, then carefully lowered herself with me, holding me steady. Her body was ice cold, like a block of frozen marble, but steady, and I felt myself relax in her arms despite the sheer embarrassment of it all. My lips barely formed the words, "Help me something to eat," before my vision darkened again. When I came to, I realized she had fed me chocolate, hovering nervously at my side, her eyes full of worry. I swallowed hard, my throat burning, and croaked a weak, "Thank you," but the sound of my apartment door opening made my blood run cold again. Ryan stood there in shock, holding takeout and staring at me, half leaning in Emily's arms like we were reenacting the final act of some cheesy drama. His eyes widened to the size of saucers, and his jaw practically hit the floor. Emily froze too, clutching me tighter instinctively, while I could only stare at my own toes digging imaginary holes into the carpet. The silence was unbearable, and finally I blurted out, "Let me explain." What followed was the most humiliating explanation of my life, admitting that I had fainted, that Emily had been helping me, and then confessing that the fever text had been sent to the wrong person. Ryan's laughter nearly shook the walls while Emily's expression went from shock to flush to something more complicated, her eyes lingering on me with a mixture of grievance and disbelief. I tried to salvage my dignity, but every word only made it worse until she finally stood up, muttered some excuse about her friend's cat giving birth, and left in a hurry, her usually calm demeanor cracking for the first time. After she left, Ryan teased me non-stop, insisting she was clearly interested in me. I denied it, blaming my fever, my drunk mistake, anything but what was obvious, but deep down, something about the way she looked at me lingered. The next morning, when I dragged myself out of bed planning to finally go to the hospital because my fever was over 39 degrees, I opened the door and there she was again, Emily Carter, standing right outside with her hand raised like she had been about to knock. Her face flickered with surprise, then steadied into calm composure, and she said simply, "Good morning." My brain, still cooked from fever, completely short-circuited again. When I opened the door that morning, still dizzy from a fever that refused to go down, the last person I expected to see was Emily Carter standing right outside my apartment with her hand mid-air like she was about to knock, her expression briefly startled before she quickly composed herself, offering me a simple, "Good morning," as if it were the most natural thing in the world for the campus goddess to show up at my doorstep at 7 in the morning. My brain, already fried by fever, couldn't process anything coherent, so I just stood there scratching my head and awkwardly mumbling back a greeting, but before I could ask what she was doing there she smoothly stepped past me like she owned the place, her gaze immediately scanning the living room until it stopped on the couch where, embarrassingly, a pile of my dirty clothes was sitting. My heart sank when I realized her campus card was sticking out from under the mess. He must have accidentally buried it when I was half delirious last night. Emily walked over, picked it up with that calm, slightly cold face of hers, but her ears turned faintly red when her eyes flicked to my clothes. I scrambled to grab everything and shoved it aside, stammering something about being in a rush, but instead of commenting she looked at me with her usual serious eyes and asked, "Is your illness bad?" I nodded weakly, thinking she'd just scold me for being careless, but instead she frowned, stepped closer, and without asking permission reached up to touch my forehead. Her hand was cool against my burning skin, and her brows knitted tighter. "It's too hot," she said firmly, "I'll take you to the hospital." I blinked, caught off guard by her tone, but before I could argue, she was already pulling my arm, guiding me out the door with a strength that didn't match her slender frame. I should have resisted, maybe told her she didn't need to trouble herself, but honestly with how weak I felt I just let her lead me, my body slumping into the passenger seat of her car as she drove with focused determination. Sitting there, I couldn't stop sneaking glances at her profile, the way the sunlight poured through the windshield and highlighted her calm, beautiful features, and for a ridiculous second I thought maybe fainting in front of her hadn't been the worst thing after all. At the hospital, the doctor barely glanced at me before declaring that my fever was too high, my throat too inflamed, and that I needed 4 drips for a few days of observation. Great, just when I thought my week couldn't get worse, now I was about to become a human pincushion. I tried to brush it off, told Emily she didn't have to stay, but she gave me that same calm look and said softly, "It's fine. This is important." For some reason, that sentence made my chest tighten. Over the next few days, I realized she meant it because Emily actually showed up at the hospital every single day, sometimes with food she had cooked, other times with flowers that changed daily like she had a secret rotation chart, and she'd sit with me while I ate, occasionally asking quiet questions or just keeping me company in silence. At first, I tried to protest, worried she'd catch whatever virus was cooking me alive, but she brushed it off every time with a shake of her head. "Your virus doesn't like me," she said once with a faint, almost proud smile, "so it's not contagious." I almost choked on my soup because who even says stuff like that, but the way her ears turned red afterward made me realize she probably didn't mean to let that slip. I started to notice other things too, like how she always blushed whenever I teased her, or how she'd lower her head and rearrange the flowers whenever she was embarrassed, muttering under her breath, "You always bully me," in that soft voice that sounded more like a confession than a complaint. The guy in the next bed even laughed once, saying, "You and your girlfriend have such a good relationship," and Emily froze, her hands pausing mid-air while her ears turned crimson. I rushed to correct him, stammering that we were just classmates, but when I turned back, she was still sitting there, lips pressed together, looking almost pitiful in a way that made my heart ache unexpectedly. I wanted to ask what she was thinking, but before I could, she looked up with a sudden smile and said, "I'll keep working hard." What that even meant, I had no clue, but it left me completely speechless. By the time I was discharged, I realized I had gotten used to eating with her every day, used to her calm presence, even used to the way she always blushed at my jokes, and the thought of not seeing her every day anymore felt strangely empty. As we walked out of the hospital together, I glanced at her and finally asked, "Aren't you worried at all? Spending so much time around me while I'm sick?" She tilted her head, thought for a second, then said with complete seriousness, "I told you already. Your virus doesn't like me." I laughed, shaking my head, but deep down, I couldn't ignore the way my heart sped up whenever she looked at me like that. Maybe I really was the idiot who mistook her for a ghost, but now it felt like she was haunting me in a completely different way, one I wasn't sure I wanted to escape. By the time I was discharged from the hospital, I realized my entire routine had shifted around Emily Carter, and it felt bizarre to go even a single day without her showing up at my bedside with food or flowers, so when I finally walked back into my apartment, still weak but technically healed, I found myself staring at the empty space like something important was missing, and that something was her. I told myself not to think too much, that she was just being kind because I was sick, but the problem was that kindness had felt too specific, too focused on me, and every time I remembered the way her ears turned red when I teased her or the way she sat silently arranging flowers when she was embarrassed, my chest tightened in a way that had nothing to do with the fever. The first week back on campus, I caught myself scanning the crowds between classes, half expecting to see her appear in her usual white dress or glasses, and when she didn't, I actually felt disappointed, like a junkie waiting for a fix. Nathan Reed noticed immediately and wouldn't stop teasing me, saying stuff like, "Bro, you're like a widower, are you sure you weren't secretly dating her in the hospital?" I denied it with all the energy I had, but he just laughed, calling me Brother Ghost now instead of Brother Rose, reminding me I was the idiot who thought the goddess was a phantom in the first place. Still, it wasn't just Nathan. Even Ryan Brooks gave me side eyes when I sat staring at my phone for minutes at a time, waiting for Emily's name to pop up on iMessage. And the thing is, it did pop up. She really did message me, sometimes asking if I had eaten, sometimes just sending short lines like, "Don't stay up too late," or "Drink more water." Simple, almost boring texts, but each one hit harder than any love confession I'd ever gotten, and every time my phone buzzed, my heart would skip like I was still running away from her on that dark street. One afternoon, when I was half asleep on my desk, I got a message, "Dinner tonight?" My first reaction was to check if she had sent it to the wrong person, but nope, it was me, and when I replied asking where, she just sent a location pin near a quiet little cafe off campus. I showed up nervously, expecting some casual group hangout, but when I walked in, it was just her sitting there by the window, sunlight spilling on her like it always did, making her look like she was glowing. She glanced up as I walked over, her eyes soft but her posture rigid like she was pretending not to be nervous. We ate together, and for once I didn't feel the need to fill the silence. Being with her was enough, the awkwardness somehow warm instead of suffocating. At one point, I joked, "So, is this your way of paying me back for mistaking you for a ghost?" Her face flushed immediately, and she nearly choked on her drink, muttering something about me never letting that go, but she didn't deny it. Instead, she whispered, "If you keep bringing it up, I'll get angry." I couldn't stop grinning at how her ears turned crimson all the way down to her neck. The more time I spent with her, the more I realized Emily wasn't the untouchable goddess everyone thought she was. Yes, she was beautiful, smart, and intimidatingly calm, but beneath that, she was awkward, easily flustered, and strangely earnest in a way that made me want to protect her. And maybe I was crazy, but I started to notice she treated me differently than everyone else. Her eyes lingered longer, her tone softened whenever she spoke to me, and she never seemed to mind my teasing even when it embarrassed her. One evening, as we were leaving the cafe, I walked her back toward our building, and the cicadas screamed in the background as the sunset painted the sky orange. I was carrying both our leftovers because she had insisted on paying, and halfway down the block, she suddenly stopped, turned to me, and said quietly, "Ethan, do you think I'm strange?" The question blindsided me. I blinked, wondering if she had somehow read my thoughts, then quickly shook my head. "No. You're just different around me. That's not strange, that's nice." Her lips curved into the faintest smile, and I swore her eyes shone like she was holding back something bigger. For the rest of the walk, she stayed close beside me, our shoulders almost brushing, and I could feel the heat radiating off her even though the evening breeze was cool. Back in my apartment later, I sat on my bed staring at my phone, replaying the moment over and over until Nathan barged in and caught me smiling at nothing. "Oh God," he groaned, "you've got it bad. Admit it, you like her." I wanted to deny it, but the words caught in my throat. Because he was right. I did like her. Maybe I had from the very first moment under that flickering streetlight when I thought she was a ghost. The thought terrified me, but at the same time, it made me feel alive in a way nothing else had. And if the look in her eyes meant anything, maybe she felt the same. I didn't know where this was heading, but one thing was clear, this wasn't just some fever dream anymore. This was real, and it was only getting stronger. By the time graduation season rolled around, I had already accepted that Emily Carter had become a constant in my life, no longer the distant campus goddess everyone whispered about but someone who texted me good morning, nagged me to drink water, and quietly sat beside me whenever I needed company, and even though we weren't officially anything yet, my friends had started treating her like she was already mine because let's be honest, the way she looked at me didn't leave much room for doubt. But still, I never expected her to be the one to take the final step. That day started like any other. I was in the dorm packing up notes for a project when my phone buzzed with a simple message, "Come downstairs." I thought maybe she wanted to grab coffee or show me something funny like she sometimes did, but when I walked out of the building, my jaw nearly hit the ground. Emily was standing there in the middle of the courtyard, holding a massive bouquet of red roses, sunlight catching her hair so she looked like she had stepped out of a movie scene, and students walking by were already slowing down, pulling out their phones because apparently this was about to become a campus-wide spectacle. My face burned instantly, every nerve in my body screaming to turn around and run, but Emily's eyes locked onto mine with such determination that my legs betrayed me, dragging me closer step by step until I was standing in front of her, heart hammering like I was about to face an execution. She held the flowers out, her lips curving into that faint, nervous smile I had learned to recognize over the past month, and in a voice soft enough for only me to hear she whispered, "Yesterday's confession was too rushed. I want to do it properly this time." I froze, the entire courtyard going silent in my ears except for her words. Then she leaned just a little closer, her breath brushing against my ear, and asked, "So, Ethan Miller, will you be my boyfriend?" My brain short-circuited on the spot. The girl I once mistook for a ghost, the one I screamed at and slapped in panic, was now standing in front of everyone asking me to be hers. For a second, I actually thought this had to be another fever dream, but the weight of the roses in my arms when she pushed them into my hands was too real, the warmth in her gaze too intense to be imagined. Around us, people were whispering, gasping, phones clicking non-stop, but all I could see was her, waiting with that vulnerable, stubborn look in her eyes that made my chest ache. Slowly, like I was afraid she'd vanish if I moved too fast, I smiled back at her, the corners of my lips tugging upward despite how nervous I was, and I nodded. "Yes," I said simply, because no other words were enough, and her entire face lit up in that moment, her composure cracking into the happiest grin I had ever seen. The crowd around us erupted into cheers, some chanting my name, others shouting hers, Nathan yelling, "Brother Ghost finally ascended," from somewhere in the back, but none of it mattered because Emily was stepping closer, slipping her free hand into mine with a grip so tight it felt like she never wanted to let go. Later that night, when the buzz of the crowd had died down and I was sitting with her on the campus lawn under the dim glow of the streetlights, I couldn't help laughing at the absurdity of how this all started. "Can you believe I actually thought you were a ghost?" I asked, shaking my head. Emily gave me a side-eye, pretending to be annoyed, but the way her lips twitched betrayed her amusement. "You still haven't lived that down," she muttered, then after a pause added quietly, "but if you hadn't thought that maybe we wouldn't be here now." Her words hit me harder than I expected, and I turned to see her staring at the ground, her ears faintly red, clearly embarrassed by her own honesty. Without thinking, I reached out and tilted her chin up so she'd look at me. "Then I'm glad I was stupid that night," I said with a grin, "because it led me to you." Her eyes widened, and for once, she didn't hide her smile. Sitting there with her hand in mine, the memory of that night under the flickering streetlight flashed in my mind, but instead of fear, all I felt now was warmth. Back then, I had run for my life convinced she was something otherworldly. Now, I realized she was just not in the way I thought. She wasn't a ghost haunting me. She was the girl who had slowly, steadily become my whole world. And this time, I wasn't running away.